Okie dokie. For folks that don't know me, my name is Kameale Terry. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ChargerHelp. I've had the privilege of building ChargerHelp for the last almost 7 years. And the reason why we started the company was really for two reasons. One, I started very early on in the industry for a software provider that was building, that we were building software for charging infrastructure. And I had the unique opportunity to really see as a CMS system where from a reliability perspective does my responsibility end? And on the other end of that, learning from manufacturers from a warranty perspective, where does their responsibility for reliability ends? And then on the other side of that, um, then looking at a customer that still has an asset that isn't working. And so that's really the reason why we started ChargerHelp, and it's been a great opportunity to build these last couple of years. And so today, what we're focused on is we're going to talk about today, stop losing money on blind diagnostic dispatches. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit from our data that we're going to be releasing next month during the reliability report. But also, if you have questions as I'm going through this presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And then also reach out to me personally if there's other things that I can be helpful. But what I always like to start with folks is kind of grounding us and understanding that charging stations are computers. I always say this over and over and over again, because I think it's the biggest piece that I think often gets missed. You know, when folks are going out to do an RFP, you're doing a lot of work on infrastructure, on electrical capacity, but little do you ever include your IT department to actually give the same level of scrutiny that you would give if you were deploying a software. But charging stations, electric vehicles, fleet vehicles that are electric, all of these things are computers. And really, it's a ton of data that's being exchanged between these computers and this software from different companies that are happening to happen in the same moment. And so reliability truly, truly depends on this information that's being exchanged seamlessly. And what we often see outside of just software, if for folks that deploy infrastructure, every piece of the puzzle it's being held by a different person, right? So an asset owner maybe only see live statuses and some session records from their CSMS. A site host, this is a person that's on the ground, that's at the location. They might see, the live status and the physical condition. A CSMS provider, they're going to see live statuses, they're going to see session records, but fault details are limited to them. Most of the time, more detailed error codes are actually going to live on the hardware side, even diverse configuration. Some hardware manufacturers will allow CMS systems to do that, but some will not. And then from a hardware manufacturer, they're not necessarily getting back what the CMS system is saying about their hardware. They're just seeing the fault detail in a device configuration. And then field service providers, traditional field service providers, maybe they'll get a live status through an app. Maybe they'll get fault detail through an email, but they're definitely going to see the physical condition when they go on site. Payment providers, they're looking at session records of payments that are being processed. And in utility, and these are utilities that do not own and operate, they're definitely only seeing maybe physical conditions and things that they can see from behind the meter. And then the vehicle, the vehicle itself typically only sees some session records and some fault details. And so not any of these folks here actually have a complete view of what is actually happening when you look at a charging station. And before I kind of get into the mix of things, I also, want to make sure to let folks know is that the market has gotten better, right? I mean, when we first came into the industry, we didn't even have a well-defined definition. And so we have seen that, right? We have looked at, okay, uptime, is the station online, right? And we did a really good job around understanding downtime, making downtime a more contractual and comparable metric. Last year, the reliability report was really stuck on first charge success, right? Can a driver actually start the first time they attempt? But then today, what we're focused on, or what we've been looking at is reliability intelligence. We say, yes, let's get to 97%. Let's get to 99%, right? But to get there, what you have to understand, and for folks that are in do reliability for other asset classes, you have to then be able to clearly understand what happened, why, what should happen next. And then the most important piece of all of this is then you need to understand the system underneath it and how it may be failing. So let's hop in. So when we talk about the, technology getting better, one of the things that we recently brought on a new team member that he studied data engineering for a large conglomerate, and he's here as our data engineer. And he was telling me, the fascinating thing is that as you start having higher percentages of reliability, that last 3%, that last 2%, that last 1%, that last point high 9, are more complex problems, right? So you get through the bulk of it, but then for fleet operators or for folks that I was just invited to a conference where they're actually looking at electrifying ambulances, those types of folks, they have no capacity, right, for something to not be working, and to not be able to actually deliver on its services. And so what we've seen, though, because we're starting to see more intelligent energy management systems, we're seeing smarter vehicles and batteries, all of these different pieces that we're adding are software functionality. We're not adding more parts. We're actually simplifying parts, right? Most things have power modules that you can swap out, but what we are adding in is software complexity. And with software complexity, adding that in, that actually allows for there to be more dependencies faster than it ever adds parts. And it's important for us to understand this bit here, because typically before I started the company, at my prior company, we would get a driver that says it doesn't work. The charger doesn't work, and you're like, okay, great. And as we start to map out like all the different places where a charger can fail at a connection that's detected. It can fail during the vehicle handshake, fail during authorization, payment validation, a CSMS exchange, charging initiated, power delivered, session maintained. And oftentimes there might not even be error codes that are correlated to any of those failures. And each person kind of sees something a little bit different, right? So when we talk about, data and information, the reason why it's so important that we start to, require data sharing in a lot of RFPs is because of this. A driver is seeing that it doesn't work. A site host is definitely seeing that, okay, the station's unavailable on my platform. The CSMS is looking at status changes. They might see transaction records. They may see OCPP messages and error codes. Hardware manufacturer, they have internal logs and component behavior, and field technicians see the physical observations. And then the asset owner itself is looking at the downtime, the service costs, and the warranty status. And the biggest piece to all of this, which we'll get into, a fault code is just an observation. It's not a diagnosis. So even though all these people have these different pieces that each one of them can't see the other thing, none of them have a way to easily diagnose because they're all sitting behind walled gardens. And so let's go through a case study. So I'm gonna go through a case study here of some of the things that happen. And I tell folks often I will end with hope. I'm not gonna give us all doom and gloom. So we will end with hope, we will end with solutions, and we'll end with a call to action because that's also important. And if I'm going really fast because I talk fast, put it in the chat, I could slow down. And if you have questions as we start going through some data and things like that, please let me know. But let's go through a case study. So we're going to follow a problem. All right, we get a detection. A station develops an issue. It's either reported by the driver, the site host, maybe a monitoring platform. Typically, first question is it in warranty, out of warranty, right? For some CSMS providers, they have like more higher response times if something is considered in warranty. And so before you can do anything, that's what you ask. Okay, now you've decided, okay, in warranty, out of warranty. Now you're going to say, okay, where does this issue lie? So as a CMS provider, if we were a CMS provider, we would say, we're going to look at all of our side. And we say, oh, no, that checks out, that checks out, that checks out. That looks good. We might say, okay, I don't think this is our problem. We think it's a hardware problem. We might reach out to our hardware vendor. That might be an email. That might be sending over a ticket. And, maybe the hardware manufacturer is like, before I even decide if this is my problem or not, did you cycle the breaker? So we're like, okay, let's go turn it off and on and see if the problem still persists. And then if the problem still persists after turning off the breaker, then a technician has to go. But from there, the resolution now depends on people because it's going to be a whole orchestration of folks trying to get their parts and permissions of information. And so now your downtime clock is ticking. And so we, when people think about, and we see this often in a lot of RFPs where folks are so hyper-focused on SLA for time on site. And I tell folks that it's a misunderstanding of the problem that you are trying to get after. Getting on site is never the issue. It is all of the in-between stuff to get that technician on site that becomes the problem. So when a problem is acknowledged, that may take some time. And then if you have to do a quote, right? So if it's out of warranty, and even with some warranties, you still have to pay for labor. So then now you have to request a quote. If you're a part of a big organization, that might be a whole thing of requesting the quote and getting the purchase order, getting the approval. You have time spent there. We said a day, but sometimes this could take 2-3 days if you don't have the right authority. And then from there, you're looking at, okay, when is the next available time? If you have a 2-day SLA, the person gets there in 2 days and then they get on site. But the actual time of like triaging, figuring out what's going on with the asset, like that time period is very small. What ends up becoming a longer time period is all of the in-between stuff that happens when you have multiple parties that don't have an in-sync system. And once the technician gets on site, now what? So we have technicians where they may not have access to diagnostic logs or configuration information. The remote command sits with the CSMS. If there's any type of proprietary fault interpretation, that's into the manufacturer. Sometimes they give you error codes, but then those error codes may be outdated or older. Troubleshooting procedures, you may get that, but they may be outdated. And then the parts and warranty authority. And we started to see now, which is, I have a lot of folks on here that are currently deploying assets, is that we're starting to see now that some manufacturers are actually charging $200 an hour for someone on their team to sit and talk to a technician. So that's putting cost on top of working with the technician. And the thing when, we talk about data, like what is the importance of data and sharing data, right? Like, why is that so important? I really wanted to drive this home for everyone. So as you're creating your RFPs and you are going out and asking questions of folks, like these are the questions, and we have other tools that we've released in the past of what does it take to run a smooth system. One, being able to have dashboard status, like everyone should be able to retrieve that, including your technician. And so I know that some CMS providers now are creating different pathways to log in so the technicians can actually get access to that information without having to reach out to anyone on your team. The other thing that honestly is hugely important, which I know for sure that some vertically integrated solutions offer to technicians, is the OCPP stream, right? It's even if I have to call in order to hear that information, I'm sitting on hold and no one's around, and I could have just seen what, during that moment in time, how was this asset behaving? That's hugely important. The other thing is being able to do a get diagnostic pull yourself and getting that information. A get configuration, is the hardware fault or is it a setting problem? We actually see this quite often where sometimes, somebody in configuring, doing some type of configuration update had a bit of a finger that slipped over and now it's misconfigured, and that's the reason why the asset is having an issue. And then the other piece to this is understanding all the internal component data, right? So much of this stuff that we're seeing around DC fast chargers is all power module issues, and most of those power module issues, you can't even tap into that because it's specific to manufacturers. But if you get access to these things, right, these things here will allow your technician and your team to actually be a lot more impactful and save you a lot of time. The other thing that's super important to understand, we're starting to see this now where, folks maybe have pre-purchased hardware and the hardware has now been sitting in, it's been sitting inside of in storage for 2 years. And by the time it deploys, the hardware is out of warranty, right? So making sure that you guys are considering that during the procurement process, because if a hardware is out of warranty, now you have a lot more steps than what you had before. And then also figuring out what is your post hardware, plan, hardware warranty plan. We actually see today, this is going to be released in a report, we're seeing that more than half of this current infrastructure is all coming out of warranty this year. And so when you start thinking about what's covered, what's not covered, what have you budgeted for, right? That amount is going to get a bit larger. And so even now going, back, we talk a little bit about, okay, the technician goes on site, we identify as a power module issue, the asset is now out of warranty, and now you're on back order, right? And so now we're looking at what we start to see across the data set is anything that required 2 truck rolls downtime was now sitting at 30 days on average. So the minute that you have to go back and do something, now you're having a longer, and all this is wait time. It is waiting on quote approval, waiting on process, and then waiting on parts. And then when the part comes back, right, now you have to start the process all over. And that's really where we start to see like a lot of the pressure happening. And we see repeat truck rolls for a few reasons. Due to not sharing data, incomplete information. We see parts availability, right? We're starting to see certain models have multiple issues. And for our clients, we're giving them a list to say, hey, you have this model of station, we're seeing it fail. You should probably pre-purchase these parts and have them on hand, because we also know this specific manufacturer has things that are on back order. The other thing is, inaccessible diagnostics is also a reason why you have a repeat truck roll. And what we'll get into is kind of like how we solve it at ChargerHelp, but more importantly, a lot of these things can be solved in your RFP process. And it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where you have to think of these devices as more than infrastructure. You have to think of them as IoT assets and really start to, and as newly innovative IoT assets that may require you to have certain, more operational focus things than just saying, having an SLA agreement. An SLA agreement is not enough. You have to require more. Because really what we see is that reliability is really in all of the time, the time is what accumulates, right? So you have the active diagnostics and repair time is very short, but then operational coordination. And then the big piece of this is just waiting, right? Waiting on queues, waiting on acceptance, waiting for support, waiting for parts, just waiting and following up and waiting. And so I think the more, and this is what we'll talk a lot about in the reliability report next month, is that was something that, we've experienced personally, but as we start to build out our systems to capture this information more and more, not only did we say, okay, these are huge problems, but like this stuff can be solved. We're going to solve it through technology, but from a procurement perspective, also this can be solved as well. And in the report, we actually do go over, we don't call out manufacturers, but we do show that there are manufacturers that are a little bit more operationally sophisticated than others in regards to their process and procedures and their capacity to troubleshoot and most importantly, to share data. And one that who I will call out as like a positive experience is Kameale. Kameale allows for you to have data access. We're actually working on a deal right now where we have data access. Autel hardware allows for you to have data access. So a lot of this waiting of like the faults and getting back information, that doesn't exist for those types of manufacturers. But there's other manufacturers where it is either localized or they do not allow for the technicians to have data access. And so really at ChargerHelp, as I get into like kind of like the second half of this, and maybe I'll pause now to take questions before I do that, is what we looked at and what I've been thinking about a lot and what we built our platform for is really this idea. There's like, how much uncertainty can we eliminate before someone goes on site? A lot of folks are just like, okay, well, ChargerHelp, you guys are O&M, you guys roll trucks, and absolutely, we will roll the truck. But what we believe, because these assets are computers, because they are IoT assets, we always trust but verify. And for us, if you are working with the O&M provider and they are not talking to you about this, they are not seeing the world this way, then you are going to be in a world of hurt, right? As you continue to deploy, like this is the way that you solve this problem. I do see that there is a maybe comment or question. I see here, yeah, can you store the parts since you service multiple chargers that are the same? Yes, we do have some of our clients where we store parts across the US. And we've done that. We don't we'll store not full on like DC fast chargers, but we'll store power modules, components. Like we actually see right now for one manufacturer, SSD cards are their thing. Like for whatever reason, we're seeing multiple SSD card failures. And then one of the things we've been doing as well is taking that data back to the manufacturer. My COO and I just had about 7 meetings with manufacturers, showcasing them 7 years of their hardware data by model And some of the things that we showed them, they were not surprised about. They're like, okay, yes, we understood that that was a problem. And this is the Gen 2 of that. And some of the things they were like, oh, wow, that was very interesting. We didn't know, because usually once a manufacturer's hardware is deployed, especially after warranty, they're not really that responsible for it, and technology is moving so quickly. So there's new stuff that's coming out. But like I stated before, a ton of stuff that are these older models are in the ground. And the last thing to that point, though, is that we cannot just say, okay, well, you guys maybe you're just now procuring assets. You're like, well, I'm getting new stuff. Like, okay, but the same stuff that right now that's breaking and having issues that now manufacturers are saying, oh yeah, we knew that was a problem. They also said that didn't break. So I just always say just trust but verify, and making sure that you have a partner that is helping you. Because everybody's going to think everything works, but deploying infrastructure into the built environment is different. And sometimes you don't know until it's deployed. But with that, if there's not any other questions, oh, there is another question. Oh, just good morning. Good morning to you too. With that, I will go ahead into kind of like how we're looking at solving this on our side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of a live demo. I always err on the side of live demo. I'm going to do a bit of a live demo in a second. But what I wanted to call out is just like purpose built of how we've seen these problems, and just like how our platform or how we're looking at solutioning them and solving it. So we're going to go through that same station power module issue that we talked about before. We're going to kind of walk through what it looks like for us. So the first thing is always warranty status. Like, for whatever reason, like some CMS systems have warranty status, but sometimes the hardware has warranty status. Sometimes folks inherited stations, they don't know the warranty status. And crazy as it seems, sometimes just understanding if the asset is under warranty or not can actually create a delay, right? Because you don't know what to do and who you're supposed to reach out to. And so that's one thing that's like, you'll see that our system is not to replace the CSMS, right? But it is truly an asset management reliability system. We keep record of all of that, right? So we understand warranty, we have entitlement, all of that is already considered before we do anything. So that already cuts time out. The other thing that we look at is, downtime includes the time between actions. And sometimes downtime is literally because the email, if people are using Zendesk or Salesforce and it's in the bottom of the million things that your support team has to do, we actually built out a purposeful homepage that really bubbles that up very quickly. And you'll see from our platform, there's other CMS providers that they just built on top of Salesforce or built on top of ServiceNow. We built this from the ground up very intentionally. The other thing is data access determines what you can diagnose. So for us, there's only one CSMS provider that has not done a full integration with us yet, but everyone else, we're getting that data live, right? And so that's huge for us on how we're able to diagnose and understand what's going on. And then we talk about, dispatch a technician is not one step. And for us, we have that full flow all in one space. And then just the repeat truck rolls. So interestingly enough, sometimes you may have a root cause for a problem, but then when the problem comes back again, you learn more about that problem, and that root cause might change, especially on DC fast chargers, where sometimes it can be a bit of a peeling the onion on some of these older models of figuring out what's wrong. But being able to collect that data and bring that data back into the system through an intelligence layer allows for us to really drive down on those repeat truck rolls. So first, starting out for us, the way that we look at the world is, the failure for us actually arrives as a record and not a phone call, right? So for us, this is actually a screenshot of what our system looks like for actions for the day, where we actually can see, okay, this was automatically generated fault. There was a certain time period. This asset is healthy, because that's the other thing. You may see that, okay, this was 15 days ago. Sometimes faults, and we ascribe it as low. Sometimes faults doesn't mean that there's a problem. And we see that often. We see it sometimes where if a driver unplugs an asset before it hits 80%, it actually throws a fault. It's very interesting. And because some of the systems don't distinguish between an alert and a fault. So you may get a fault and it actually is, no, there's not a problem here. This asset is healthy. And so that's one thing that's very helpful, because somebody may get this, dispatch a technician, charge my hourly rate, and now you're stuck. So it's not only generating from the fault is adding the additional context of what's going on. So that's something that's like was really intentional and important to us. The other thing for us is really around this idea of like waiting as a stage and not a gap. We're always looking at, okay, what do we have that's stuck per se? Downtime includes the time between actions, not only the time spent repairing the charger. So for us, we can go into our system and we can say, okay, what's still waiting? And then this actually gets bubbled up to our team. So we are always looking at, let's always make sure that we are like on top of it and moving. And the way this is set up, which I'll give you guys a brief look at it, is that I try to set up like inbox zero. That's like my favorite thing is inbox zero. And so as our team moves through it, it actually zeroes out. And so it gives you kind of like this great feeling of like, oh, I've accomplished something. The other thing that we look at as well is really being able to scope out the problem. So, we want to understand, like, we want to diagnose first, and we always say trust but verify. We may have somebody that's like, oh, we need you to do X, Y, and Z, and we're like, okay, no, we're gonna wait. So we always trust but verify and dispatch only if we must. And like I said before, because there's so many cranky noises, we'll keep things open in order to be like, okay, this is happening a lot. It looks like it's disconnected, but then we see that somebody charged. There's something odd that's happening here. And we may reach out to that CSMS to say, hey, just like flagging this is happening. One thing that could be happening is that the station is a free vend mode. We've seen that happen before. And so for us, really looking at the status, the message stream, the configuration availability, all of that is being recorded and really building out, our chief product officer talks about a station biography. And so when these assets start to age and have problems, you have more and more information. The other piece that we look at as well is the procedure, attaching a procedure before the truck actually moves. So creating a work order and naming the activity and being able to have all of those workflows in one place is like hugely important to us. And we've been essentially just writing down those workflows over the years. So it's not that we're just getting the SOPs from manufacturers. No, we take their SOPs, where they write, was there something that was nuanced about what they did, and what did we get done? And then the other piece to this is that we actually look at when we're scheduling a technician, we're looking how close is our partner technicians. We're also looking at what time that we can schedule them, and then getting all of that done in one fell swoop, one platform. So you're not coming out, you're not emailing, you're not going back and forth. Everything that you need is in one platform. And then the piece that we just interjected recently is that because we have so much data, we actually start to interject our first intelligence layer. So looking back at prior work orders to say, okay, well, I see that this asset was behaving this way. I see these work orders. I'm going to suggest a resolution here. And we're moving towards getting to a place of high confidence on even taking action. So being able to maybe update, send a boot notification or send different activities based off of not just behavior of what the station is saying, but all of the work order data that we have done in the past. And then the biggest piece of all of this that's really important for us is that nothing closes without a root cause. And we cycle that data back into the platform because we want to consistently know and understand how are we solving these problems. And one of the things that we had talked about before is that we do see that as you see these problems kind of unlatch themselves, the more stickier problems, that root cause actually gets more robust as you gain more information. And then the last piece of this is for us, it's like we always look at what has been done before. So tracking the preventative maintenance, when there's something was troubleshoot, what was done, if we met an SLA, if we didn't meet an SLA, and being honest to that and seeing everything all set together. Sorry. And so for us, we still, just being honest where we're at, like we've done a really good job of having 12 integrations. We have hardware manufacturers like Kempower, Autel, Fractal EV that is sharing component level data with us. There's still manufacturers that don't. They still have it gated. And then also, for our customers that don't have the availability to pre-purchase parts, we are still seeing some things back ordered. We saw DC fast charger connector handles back order almost 90 days for one manufacturer. So we're seeing that is still like a problem. And then on our roadmap, we're really getting into this idea of this root cause into prediction. So we have so much data and things that we can see. So how do we utilize that in order to not only set up one single customer up for success, but that goodness that we learned from that one instance, we can share with all of our customers. And so for us, it's like we have the same, we get same information. The difference with us is that we're bringing in our field service data and all of the data that we've used over the years in order to really rebuild out this picture. And I actually want to show you guys a quick example before I start to take questions. 1 second. And then while I'm doing this, yeah, if folks have more questions, please let me know. But something that just got released, which I'm like so excited about, is bringing all of the data into essentially into one place. And so this is ours, like it's live. But this is really neat. So we're bringing in OCPP data so we can understand the health of an asset, how it's doing. We can also see the status, how it was when we sent information. One thing that's very interesting, every CMS provider sends data and information at different time periods. And so that's also why you may see sometimes, like if you have an app and it shows like available with assets not working or vice versa, it may just be that that specific CMS provider does not actually send data as often as others. And we've actually seen this variant, not just across CMS providers, actually across different assets, which is also very interesting. But we can see when kilowatts were done. But then the other piece of this is that we're bringing in the fault data right in real time. And we can see when that fault actually occurred. And then if there was ever an issue that was open, we can actually click into, actually, I'll go back to that real quick. We can click into this issue to see, okay, this was opened in May. It resolved. It was open for 8 days. The root cause was a damaged HMI. The resolution was to replace the HMI. And so that's all there. And when you click into it, it gives you more information on what was actually done. And we actually worked with the OEM to get this done and completed. And then if this was an issue that we had seen before, you would actually see, well, this is already resolved, but if it wasn't resolved, then you would see a suggestion here from the AI. The other thing that I wanted to show you all as well is just kind of how we're tracking, like keeping track of things. And this is something that we do offer. Like if you have a ton of assets and you want your team to manage it themselves, we do offer an instance where you can work in the platform yourself, but then being able to essentially see all your actions in one spot, seeing things that you need to review in one spot, being able to see what's in waiting, work orders that are scheduled. So being able to look at it from a calendar view of what's scheduled and what's going out and what's happening. And then also for work in progress, for work orders that are happening like right now, or like this one was 4 hours ago that someone's on site and where that person is doing, and then sign off. So like looking at, okay, hey, this is an automatically generated fault. Even the noise we track, that's one of the things that's really different with us. Like why we say we go alongside of a CSMS. A lot of CMS, they may like disregard noise. We still want to track it because we still want to understand why that station is behaving in a certain way. So these are things that we may go into and like automatically like resolve out. And then the last thing I wanted to show you guys was, I think I've showed this to you guys before, but being able to not only track your uptime, but also downtime. Some folks have a lot of long downtime because they're trying to swap out assets. And so in that event, we still want to keep track of it. So, and then the thing that's always so interesting to me is the difference between faulted and intermittent disconnects. So we see this quite often where an asset may not fault, but in the intermittent time that it may be disconnected. And so we track that average. And then if something actually faults, we have that and how often it happens. And so it just kind of just to wrap us up here, I would say if I could leave you all with anything as I get into questions, the first thing is that procurement process is so important that in your procurement process, you need to involve your IT team. You need to understand that these assets are IoT assets and don't just accept a basic warranty. We produced, I think, a guide, I think last month. And if you reach out to me, I'll send it to you again. But we produced a guide on the things that you need to call out in your procurement process to ensure, one, that you know about firmware updates, that you have a good understanding of what their internal processes are. How do they escalate an issue? It's okay that, yes, they're gonna acknowledge your issue in 4 hours, but then what? Do they have an MOU with their partners, right? So, because what usually happens is the person say, well, I'm doing everything I'm doing. I'm waiting on the manufacturer to do that. We can't allow for folks to just have their hands up in the industry that it's not that they can't do anything like that. And then the other piece, I tell folks all the time, ChargerHelp, we don't have like true direct competitors, but I think it's because people are solving O&M wrong. I've been in this for a decade now, and I think that if you're not looking at data, if you don't have access to information, if you're not compiling information, if you're not utilizing information from the field to make better decisions, to get to some of these harder problems, then you're doing it wrong, right? And so I really push folks here that as you start thinking about your O&M solution, your time period after warranty, that you're asking the harder questions of your O&M providers of solutions that are made for IoT assets. And I think the cool thing is that we've come so far. ChargerHelp, we hit 500 million data points. We have 12 integrations. We've touched over 67,000 charging stations. And from just that viewpoint, we've been able to build something very robust and I think very impressive. But with that, let me get to these questions. And if there's other questions, please let me know. Okay, what is the average number of repairs per charger? This could be 1 year old or 5 years old. How does this affect ROI and rate increases to cover O&M costs? So average repair per charger will depend on the model of charger. So we do see that certain models of chargers may take an average of so you would see almost an average of 2 truck rolls. And so usually these are level 2s that are not modular. So there's a set of level 2s that have been deployed out that where you can't just swap the head, you have to really rebuild that asset. And then we call it that peeling the onion. And so you replace one thing to only find out that another thing is replaced. And so I would say that if you're looking at newer level 2s, then you're going to have lesser downtime and it'll be easier to swap those assets. Where we are starting to see increased downtime from a DC fast charger perspective is assets that have power modules, because we're actually starting to see that some of those power modules are actually getting degraded before their warranty. But one of the things too that a manufacturer did tell me is making sure you do have a good preventative maintenance plan and making sure that your O&M provider understands that. Every DC fast charger should have a preventative maintenance plan, right? You need to be going in there, cleaning the components, opening up the station, doing all the protocol that manufacturer has set forth. If you don't do that, because these assets are in the built environment, you will have problems. The last thing that I'll answer to this question that we see is the bigger issue, which has less to do with age, is going to be firmware updates. And this really has to do with good firmware hygiene. And so when you are working with a CMS provider or a manufacturer, you need to ask them, how often do they update their firmware? What is their firmware protocol? Some manufacturers will actually allow you to push firmware on your own. If this is kind of, how you call it, like, you're just like, what are you saying around firmware? Think about your cell phone, right? So your cell phone will ask you to update firmware. Sometimes if you update that firmware, it's like fixing a bug or creating a bug. And that's what we're talking about, is that the stations themselves have their own firmware. And so if somebody pushes firmware onto your station, it can introduce a bug into your system. It can also maybe misconfigure something. It can stop a charging station from working with a certain vehicle. We see this happen often. And that type of repair can get very costly and start to eat down. But in all of those instances, if you, one, get an understanding of this upfront during your procurement process, it will prevent you from having those problems later on. And then can you link the guide? I will, with the guide, I will have my team send it out to this group here. It was called, because somebody had challenged me to ask me if I can do a 99% guarantee. And I was like, honestly, I could, but these are all the things that would need to be true in order for us to do a 99% guarantee. And so that's where that guide came about, where we suggested some, RFP language. And then there's a company that's actually helping people, look at their RFPs and write RFPs, which I'll also have my team send that out as well. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. Thank you so much. Okay, yes, we will forward it. And then in regards to our target customers, we really hyper focus on, we have a lot of utility operators, fleet operators, and then we just started to work with more manufacturers, where if you're a manufacturer and you're looking to have sorry, my words are slipping me. If you're a manufacturer and you're looking to have like a specialized warranty package, then you can white label us. But really, my best customers are folks that want to keep their assets working and believe in, you know, the ROI of switching to electrification. Because if you can control this cost, you can actually save a ton of cash, a ton of money. I think those are all the questions I see right now. I'll hang around for a little bit if there's any other questions, but thank you guys so much for joining. If you're going to be at the 4th conference, that's when we're going to be releasing the report. I'm proud of the report every year, but we're very proud of the report this year. We have some really cool case studies and really shifting this conversation from, you know, whether you're 97% or 99%, but really to, hey, when something fails, how do we fix it, right? And that's, to me, that is a mature market. So thank you again for your time, and I hope you all have a great day.